Hello, my name is Eve Rickert. I am the publisher at Thornapple Press. I am joining today from the traditional and ancestral territories of the Lekwungen and Saanich peoples, colonially known as Victoria, British Columbia. And I am here with Andrea Zanin, celebrating the launch of their new book, Post-Nonmonogamy and Beyond. And Andrea, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Andrea Zanin, and I'm joining you from Toronto, which is Toronto, Ontario, on the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. And yeah, I'm super excited. It's publication day.
Yeah, and I love this book, and I think that this is going to be so useful to so many people. I'm already hearing people saying like, "Oh, post non-monogamy. There's a word for that thing that that I do, that I am." Like, there's so. Andrea, tell us about what post non-monogamy is and how this book came into existence.
So post non-monogamy is the state that some people arrive at after they've done non-monogamy for a meaningful amount of time, whatever that means to them, and then for any number of reasons have chosen to stop. And that might be that they decide to be single, or it might be that they are exclusively partnered with just one person. But the idea is that they had a life experience of non-monogamy of some kind, and this book sort of asks the question of then what? Like, what is it like to then not be doing that thing anymore? And it's not about like thinking that non-monogamy is bad. I'm sure that happens to some people, but this is just about having made a different life choice. It's also not permanent. You can move in and out of post non-monogamy. I'm not here trying to make rigid rules about it. But it just felt to me like once you've had a meaningful experience of non-monogamy and then you stop, you're not the same person, and you don't necessarily think the same way that you would have if you'd never done it at all. And I think that there are a lot of people, myself included, in that position, and it felt worth talking about. Yeah. You also asked how it came about, and like truthfully, how it came about is because I got bugged a lot to write something. I did, and I mean I talk about it a bit in the book, right? But just sort of going through a lot of life and some really difficult stuff, and coming out feeling like I didn't really have much to offer. But then, I had a number of people from the press, among others, sort of poke at me to see if I had anything that I could contribute. And I kept on thinking, no, I really don't actually. And then I thought, well, but maybe that's the thing that I have that I could contribute, which is, being in this place where I'm not doing it anymore, and thinking about it, what that means. So yeah. And here we are with a teeny tiny adorable,
Mm-hmm.
I love how pocket sized it is.
Yeah, so these are, just to give a little plug for the series, these are part of the More Than Two Essential series. So they are, as Andrea says, pocket-sized books that I'm curating on sort of focused topics in non-monogamy. So before this one, we had non-monogamy and death, we had non-monogamy and happiness, non-monogamy and neurodiversity, and non-monogamy and teaching. And then this fall, we have non-monogamy and sex work. So they're very much a sort of, collect them all kind of thing that I'm hoping that people, but also we'd love to get pitches for books in this series from Canadians with ideas about stuff they want to write about. Do you want to talk at all about like how you came to see yourself as post non-monogamous?
Yes, but before we even go there, I just want to do this little like full disclosure. Yeah. I also do substantive editing with Thornapple Press, and so all these other titles in the series I've had the privilege of, at minimum, looking at, in most cases working with, and they are so good. They're so interesting and so fantastic. And so like anyone who's watching, like, don't get me wrong, happy to have a little party for my own book, but also like they're great. It's really worth reading the others.
Agreed.
Yeah. So what brought this? Ask me your question again.
Just if you want to talk a little bit about sort of what brought you to a place where you started thinking about this whole post-non-monogamy thing, and am I post-non-monogamous? And
yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that there's a long time during which I sort of hung on to, and I'm not saying I don't still, but hung on to an identity as a non-monogamous person. But the more time passed that, the relationships I was in ended, I wasn't starting any new ones. And it wasn't just that, I hadn't started any new ones. It's also that I wasn't looking for one, or any. And I did have one for a couple of years, and that ended too. And it was, but throughout, even then, I remember feeling in that relationship like I didn't want multiple partners. So even though I was dating at that time, I didn't want to therefore go out and sort of repeat what I used to do in my 20s and 30s of dating more than one person. And it wasn't because I thought it was bad. It wasn't because I just was like, I don't have the energy, man. I have like other projects that are really meaningful to me. And I've got this like life that I've built where I live alone and I'm quite happy spending a fair bit of time by myself. And I have really interesting and satisfying work. And I have really close friend relationships and relationships with my brothers and my sisters-in-law. Like my life feels good. And I wasn't looking to add more people in a romantic capacity. I didn't, and it wasn't even that I thought that, like if my partner had wanted to go off and have other adventures, I would have been fine. Like, I didn't want it for me anymore. And so it was like this choice I kept finding myself making, despite this identity that I had as a non-monogamous person. And I really started to feel the tension between those two things. Like, what does it mean to have this like many years of experience doing non-monogamy, thinking about it, reading about it, writing about it, teaching about it even, and not be doing it and also not wanting to be doing it? Like, what's going on in there? And that sort of felt, so like one day, funny enough, on Valentine's Day, last year, I had this like flash of inspiration that I could maybe actually explore that on purpose. And so I did. So I worked up an outline and then pitched it. And then I ended up spending several months reading. Oh my God, must have read 35 books to sort of prepare, to sort of try and nail down all the ideas I had and put them in conversation with some really interesting work by other thinkers. And so that's how that happened.
So that's really interesting. So what are some of the most interesting things you learned during all that reading?
Well, so the three areas I did reading in, one was around desire, libido, lack of desire, asexuality, and other kind of, that general topic range. The next one was around stress and trauma. So I just read a lot of stuff about burnout and the effects of trauma and healing from trauma and post-traumatic growth and all kinds of stuff like that. And then the third subject that I read a bunch in was around the question of solitude, which to me, of all the three, they were all interesting. And I read lots of fascinating stuff. But that solitude one, I think, was kind of the richest in a way, because and then the way I've expressed it is like, I mean, are we talking about loneliness? Are we talking about being alone, which are not the same thing? Are we talking about being single? Are we talking about celibacy? Are we talking about living alone? Like, are we talking about being in relationship but aromantically? Are we talking about, self-marriage, or these sort of the concept of quirky alone, or sort of chosen singlehood? Like, there's even the concept of silence. Like, I just found like the same question, or introversion, right? Like the same question is, you can attack it from so many different angles. And there's like some nugget where they all sort of touch on in the middle, but no one of those topics really speaks to the whole thing, if that makes any sense. So it's like this really interesting kind of intellectual exercise to try and get at some kernel in the middle by reading from all these different angles. And I've continued to read on that topic, because I don't know if I've quite gotten to the kernel of it yet, but it really captured my interest and my imagination. So yeah, I think, who knows, maybe that'll turn into a whole other project of its own at some point. But I've got this like stack of books that steadily keeps growing that are all about solitude and aloneness. Yeah. I don't know.
Interesting.
I don't know if that tells you
And
what I learned. Maybe it tells you what I didn't learn. I learned that there's lots of things left to learn.
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, I know that, one of the things you talk about in the book and that you mentioned earlier is that one of the things that distinguishes post non-monogamy from just monogamy is that when you have been living non-monogamously for some significant period of time and then you stop doing that, it's not the same as it was before. And I know that you don't have excuse me, a lot of experience in monogamous relationships. So I don't know how much you can speak to this, but what do you think changes in the sort of pre and the post? What are some things that might change for some people, if not you?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I started dating when I was maybe 12 or 13, and and then I entered my first non-monogamous relationship when I was maybe 23. So I had a solid 10 years in there. I was quite young, but I still had enough time that I left home pretty young, and I had the experience of living with a partner for several years and so forth before sort of finding non-monogamy. So I have some basis for comparison, but we're going back a ways and into a very different phase of my existence. And I think for me, and I mean, obviously this is going to be super different for every person, right? Like your trajectory is going to be different. Everyone's trajectory is different. For me, the experience of entering non-monogamy was one in which I felt like I finally got to relax, if that makes any sense. It was sort of like, oh, I don't have to wrestle with sort of tiptoeing around, other like people's sensitivities about how relationships are supposed to go that I don't quite get, but I'm willing to respect, but I don't have like a deep understanding of. So it's not intuitive, like monogamy, I always felt was sort of like, where's the instruction manual? I don't really get it. Like each person that I partnered with or dated seemed to have a different set of rules. And I was like, oh, okay, no problem. We could do it. We could do it by those rules. Oh, these ones are a little different. Okay, I can, no worries. As long as I can figure it out, I can do that one too. Right. Like, so it was never about like wanting to hurt anyone, or I wasn't a cheater. I wasn't like but I was like, it seems like part of what the rule is here is that if you are interested in more than one person, that's wrong. So you shouldn't be, but also you're not supposed to lie. So what do you do with that if you are interested in more than one person? Are you supposed to not tell, or are you supposed to tell because that's the honest thing, but that breaks the rule of like, it was just very, it didn't make sense to me. And so I felt like always a little bit on edge around like how to manage my own sense of needing to be honest and straightforward, but also not wanting to hurt people or break the rules. Right. And so entering non-monogamy for me was this experience of going, oh, it's finally on the table. We can just talk about that. Like everybody is allowed to say what's going on. And it was just so much easier because I didn't have to like certainly didn't have to filter artificially and like figure out what the filters were supposed to be that someone else had made up. I could just it was much more natural for me to be really open and honest about things. And I think that in post non-monogamy, that same experience is like, now I don't really want to have any kind of relationship. I don't want to have a friendship. I don't want to work with a client. I don't want to deal with whatever, I want that level of honesty and that kind of open approach to communication everywhere. And as opposed to trying to sort of fit myself back into a world where that's not okay, I want to create a world around me where it is, right? And so that sort of ethos of openness and clarity and honesty just feels to me like the thing I get to carry through. And now I have this experience of knowing that there are social structures, relationship structures, kinds of connections with people where that's possible. So it's not like I'm not stuck in a place where I still feel like I have to tiptoe around. Certainly, that doesn't mean maybe I'm an elephant galumphing through the room and breaking things sometimes because of this approach. And I'm not saying it works for everybody, but it really does work for me. So, I certainly try to bring that. Anyway, so that's like one example. And I'm sure there's lots more, like even just that sense of, generosity and openness, and like, how do we co-create a solution to a problem that's affecting all of us, whoever us is in a given moment. And, and relationships too, right? Like, I mean, I was in a triad for about 4 years with a partner that I'd been with in total for 7 years. And my 2 partners from that triad are the people I now call my best exes. And they live, you know, a 5-minute walk away, and we spend lots of time together and have keys to each other's houses. And, you know, like there's like this ongoing, now it's platonic, but ongoing sort of triad support network. You know, I'm going in for surgery in the fall. Who's taking me in? Well, of course it's one of them. Who's taking me on the other side? The other one, right? Like it's, you know, so that sort of chosen family that came from a non-monogamous arrangement is still very much in place today. So like a bunch of things. I mean, that's my story, right? Like, but I think everybody who's doing it would have their own version of what the after looks like.
Yeah, I mean, that sort of fluid approach to relationship feels very relationship anarchist to me as well.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
That brings me to another question. There's, you know, the first chapter in here is called On Identity and Choice. And I know this is something you and I talked a lot about. You and I talked about when we co-authored More Than Two. And it, you know, continues to be an interesting question to me, because when you look at the two of us, our lives are very similar in a lot of ways. Like we're both very, and you know, in some important ways, we're both very solo. We're both sort of, you know, I'm single-ish, I say, and you know, so but like sort of, you know, single-ish by choice. Both not totally closed to the possibility of a new relationship, but like not looking for them and sort of not really interested in. But you know, you have sort of claimed this I don't want to like this label, this sort of this, or you've embraced this position of sort of post non-monogamy, and I don't see myself that way. Like to me, I'm like, I'm non-monogamous and I will always be non-monogamous, regardless of what is happening in the circumstances of my life. Even if I am in an exclusive relationship, I will be a non-monogamous person in an exclusive relationship. And I wonder, you know, how what do you think the difference is? Is it just a matter of degree? Is it a matter of like what identities are important, or, you know, something else?
That's a good question. And then a good, like, that's a thinker. I'm not sure I have a fast and easy answer for you. I know that that for me, my thinking remains very non-monogamous in its essence, and I'm not sure that could ever change. So I think in that sense, we are quite similar in that regard. And I think I think part of it was actually being in a relationship for a couple of years with only one person and trying to explain. So like I met this person and they were like, you know, there was really great chemistry, and then they were like, I am monogamous and I have absolutely no interest in any other form of relationship. And I was like, okay. But they also really wanted to go out to bathhouses and have like casual sex. And I was like, right, okay. So, and I, on the other hand, am non-monogamous, or I've kind of been this like poster kid for non-monogamy, and I have zero interest in dating more than one partner or having adventure. I'm just like, I'm not interested at all. Like I have work to do. I have things on my plate. I'm not seeking. I'm not interested. I'm barely interested in doing this. Like it's only by dint of this really great chemistry that I wanted to do this at all, but I wouldn't have sought it out. And it, you know, and so I was like, how do we put those two things together with like a monogamous person who wants to essentially have non-monogamous adventures and a non-monogamous person who really doesn't? And I was trying to find a word to explain, like, just because you're getting involved with me doesn't mean you're signing up for a non-monogamous arrangement, but I can also offer that set of skills around communication and openness, and I'm, you know, not going to be super jealous if you want to go off and have fun, like, you know. So I was just trying to find a word that wasn't just like, I'm not doing it right now. You know, like, so it was just that concept of, I guess, trying to explain where I was at. And then and then when I was thinking about it, I was realizing it wasn't just where I was at in that moment. I had been there for years and I didn't really envision it changing. And it's not like I mean, there's lots of things that have happened to me that I didn't envision. So I'm not saying that this is any kind of like, you know, prediction of the future. It could change tomorrow for all I know. But but I felt like I needed some way to explain that just because I had this mindset and this identity and this history, that it wasn't actually an active thing I wanted to do. And I think that was actually at the heart of like really having to chew on the complexity of that. Yeah, but like you, I mean, it's in some fundamental way, I'm a non-monogamous person. It's just that, when you haven't done it for 10 years and you don't expect to, and then you have opportunities and you don't take them because you don't want them. I mean, comes a point for me where I was like, it starts to feel weird to not disclose that somehow proactively, And weirdly, for me, there was actually a parallel to, like for a long time, I was blogging about sex and sexuality and relationships. And while I was doing that, and I, still every once in a while, but not nearly the way I did before. While I was doing that, my experience of my own body shifted so much because I was in chronic pain that got worse and worse and worse. I started going to see, most of it was like being sick was like a part-time job. And then it became almost a full-time job, and, surgeries and radiations and chronic pain management and pain clinics. Like it was taking up so much of my life that I started to feel like I was being dishonest by not disclosing that somehow in the blogging that I was doing, because it wasn't just like happy, yay, sex is fun. Like there was this whole other story that was going on that was affecting absolutely everything in my personal experience and in my thinking and in the things I wanted to study and read about and in the kinds of people I was connecting with. And so it felt like, I guess there hit a point for me where it began to feel dishonest to not mention that, even if I could have just as easily not bothered and still had, whatever useful things to say. So there's a resonance there too, right? Like where it's sort of, there comes a point when reality, like when the discourse and the reality aren't matching somehow. And I feel like I'm too integrative in my thinking. I needed to bring them together in some way that I could talk about more honestly. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I was thinking, if someday in the future I were to find myself in a long-term exclusive relationship, even though I might still say, well, I'm a non-monogamous person, I might start to say like, yeah, I'm probably post-non-monogamous. Like it's probably this is the way it's gonna be. So, so yeah, it's interesting. But it is very fluid. So
well, and I think it would be, I think it's fluid for me. It could be fluid for you. It could be, I mean, it's not, I was never intending for this concept to be something that people would feel like they would have to apply to themselves as an identity and then like take it on and embody it and like never change. It's really, for me, it's more of a descriptor of a state. Yeah, it's funny.
Like being single almost.
Like being single.
Not that it's a corollary, but that it's a similar kind of, it's a temporary type of word, or can be.
Yes. And also, I'm trying to think if we have a real equivalent to this in English, and I think maybe we don't. But like in Spanish, there's two different verbs for the word to be, right? There's ser and estar. And one of them is like when we say I am cold, it's a state that you're in, right? As opposed to like I am cold, meaning like I'm a mean bastard. Do you know what I mean? Like which is like more of a type of thing that you are in your core or in your essence. And we don't really have that differentiation in English between the two different kinds of being. But I guess in my head, I was thinking more of it as like a description of, I'm cold or I'm warm or I'm hungry or whatever, and not so much a descriptor like I'm human or I don't know, something more permanent and more intrinsic. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. I also just want to mention for those watching us, if you have any questions, just make a comment underneath the video that you're watching, and it'll show up for us in the interface that we're using here, and we can answer your questions. So, so as I don't think we've mentioned yet, but Andrea and I also co-authored the forthcoming new edition of More Than Two. And I'm wondering if you can talk about like either the differences besides size and scope, but and maybe ways that they kind of informed each other, because they were both those writing processes were going on at the same time. So is there a relationship between the two books?
Yeah, I was really busy for a while there in the spring. Whew,
Sorry.
yeah, just how it works out, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, well, I mean, yeah, so post non-monogamy is a snack, and more than two is a large meal with dessert and a second helping. And yeah, I mean, it was interesting to experience working on what in a way are two sort of radically opposed topics at the same time, right? Because in more than two, we're talking about sort of the notion of non-monogamy, and it's not only for newbies, but it's in a large part, I think the people who might be most inclined to pick it up are going to be folks who are new to doing non-monogamy and want thoughts about that, and guidance and advice and ways of thinking, and this is for people who've done it for a while and then stopped. So it's almost like this weird bookending of, like, I don't know what a person's trajectory might look like, maybe. So it was interesting to think about it from these two angles at the same time, and certainly, I mean, it's a lot of the same things are going to be relevant, and I mean, I certainly found myself looking at some of the same thinkers and writers on these interesting topics. But at the same time, it kind of, not just being opposed to each other, but they sort of, there's a bit of an arc in there. Does that make sense? Like, to try and think about the things that a person might want to address or think about when they're just starting out, and then reflecting back on that same process from the other end if you've decided that you're done, at least for a while. Yeah, there was definitely, I mean, there's lots of resonances, and I mean, I'm only one person, right? So it's all happening in the same brain. Yeah, but at the same time, I don't think they repeat each other. I don't know. I don't think we really. Yeah.
No, I don't think there's really any overlap, which is great.
It's probably.
I mean, maybe a little bit on the solitude piece, because they both address sort of but from different perspectives. But More Than Two, second edition, talks about learning how to be alone, whereas and this sort of, well, it talks about the same thing, but as sort of something that you've already discovered that and found that, as opposed to in More Than Two, it's more about sort of the importance of being able to find that. So,
well, and also I think there's a difference between, like, if you're doing multiple relationships, solitude is super valuable in the sense that you do need to take time for you and not just completely throw yourself into everybody else that's around you, right? And so the notion of solitude takes on this different cast, I guess, somehow, if you're trying to find solitude when you're really surrounded by people and you're really committed, and entwined with multiple people. It can be harder to carve out that solitude. It can be, I think it's a different thing than when you might be only with one person or with nobody at all, and then solitude might be more of like oh wow, like, as opposed to me having to find it, now I have so much of it, how do I feel about that, right? So, like, different angles, but I think it's worth thinking about at almost any stage of life, right? Or almost any kind of relationship.
Yeah. Definitely.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing, the other overlap was that I was working on both of them while I was in Oaxaca. I spent 5 weeks in Oaxaca with the people I call my best exes, my two close exes and friends. And so there was certainly also just that ongoing experience of being with the people that I have done so much of my non-monogamy with, while thinking about both what it was like to do it, like having to sort of go back in memory to think about, like, the valuable things I learned there and so forth, right? And then also being in that same state, but when we're not actually in that configuration anymore. Yeah. So being, like, in super close proximity to the very people that a lot of this comes from. Anyway, yeah.
That's really lovely.
Yeah.
Honestly, I love hearing about your best exes.
They're pretty great. I can't wait for you to meet them.
Yeah.
That'll happen. That'll totally happen.
They're going to come to our book launch in Toronto, right?
Oh my God. Yeah. Well, at least one of them will. Yes.
Okay.
Yes. We'll find a way to make that happen one way or the other. Yeah.
So, any other projects that you have on the go, or anything on the horizon that you're thinking about doing or working on?
Yeah. A couple of things. I've been asked to write a chapter on BDSM these books are both about non-monogamy. A lot of my past writing and experience and teaching and stuff has been around leather and kink and BDSM. So I have a chapter that I'm supposed to be writing at some point in the next couple of months. Don't ask me when, since we're going on a book tour, about BDSM for a scholarly collection. And I also have a book that I've pitched, and we'll see if I can actually make it happen, which is about, the concept is sort of also nonfiction, BDSM, understanding BDSM if you're not kinky, if you need to understand it as a professional for some reason, whether you're an educator or a social worker or, a nurse or some other kind of practitioner who is confronted with questions of what kink is and how it works in the work that you do. Or perhaps if you have a friend, but I think it's more geared at professionals of one kind or another, because I feel like I've had a few people ask for it, and it seems to be the kind of resource that could really be useful. And I have existing work already done on that's just not published. So I'm going to pick it up and beef it up and see if I can make that into something interesting. And I also have a memoir about the intersections of chronic pain and my explorations of pain in the context of BDSM over, a 20-year period. It's been in the works since about 2013, and I have an enormous amount of it done. And in fact, I think I have too much of it done. So my challenge now is to see, I got to tackle at some point the question of how do I make this into a publishable length? And then what do I do with it once it's gotten there? And I don't think it's on the back burner now, but it's writing that is very close to my heart, and that feels really like a lot of the writing I've done in the years I haven't been blogging has been that. And at some point I'd like to see it go somewhere, but I'm not sure when or where or if that's actually going to work. But one of those dreams. Maybe one day that'll happen. So yeah, we'll see. We'll see what else comes up. And then of course there's More Than Two, which we're going to be going on this tour for in September, and that's super exciting.
So is there anything that you want to talk about that I haven't asked about?
Is there anything I want to talk about? Well, there's that curveball I was asking you about earlier.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. I don't know. I'm thrilled about this little book. I know that we're going to be doing this tour for More Than Two second edition, and because it's me and this book is also just going to have come out, that folks can pick it up in the same stores, and I will happily sign it and stuff. But I guess I'm curious to see. So this is my first book. I've never had one before. It's a new experience for me. I've worked in publishing in various ways, but never actually had my own. So the whole experience is new, and I feel kind of virginal about it, which is an interesting place to be in your 40s. And I'm really curious how it's going to land. Like, I don't really know what to expect. It feels like there's like a big open question about what next. And, I've written a lot, but I've never been an author in this way before. So it feels like all new territory, and I'm kind of curious to see, because one of the things that to me was most interesting when I was researching this was to learn that, there's this statistic that 4 to 5% of the population at any given time in Canada and the States, according to the numbers, is actively non-monogamous in some way or another. But nearly 3 times that many people have done it at some point in their lives, but aren't doing it anymore. So in a way, it's kind of like this niche topic. And in a way, it's actually a bigger potential readership than anything about non-monogamy in an active way. And so I'm curious to see if that means it gets taken up by lots of, I don't know, what's the readership going to be like on this? I'll be intrigued to learn, look forward.
Yeah, it'd be really interesting to do some surveys of those folks, right? There's been a lot of efforts to do surveys of actively non-monogamous folks, but all of the folks who've done it before in different ways and aren't anymore, what were their experiences, and
totally,
and how do they feel now?
Yeah, really, well, I did a podcast recording with Justin Laymiller, who podcasts at Sex and Psychology, who is an academic, and as we were talking about this book, he brought it up a number of times. He was like, every time, like we every question we discussed, we sort of spawned 6 more research topics that someone could study, and I would love to see that happen. Like, I would be thrilled if this led to people picking it up as a research topic and looking into it from any number of perspectives. I would be intrigued to get more data, because this book is not a very data focused book. It's very much about, thoughts and ideas and philosophies and questions and curiosities, but yeah, if there were more numbers and more like qualitative, like, what's this like for folks? How did they get there? I don't know. Am I on track with my trajectories that I'm putting out there? Are there ones I haven't thought of? I don't know. Yeah. It would be so cool.
That's a good description of these little books too, thoughts and ideas and musings and wonderings. And I don't remember everything else you said, but
yeah. Questions and
anything you want to ask me
about not
anything.
Being post-non-monogamous.
While we're here.
Well, since we're here, so we should talk about plane tickets. Yeah, no. I'm actually curious if, and I mean, we're going outside anything to do with my book, but what other snack-sized topics are in the works? Do you have other things that people have pitched you, or other topics that you're hoping people will pitch you on? Like,
yeah, I have a lot of topics that I would love to do a book about, to do books about. We do have one in the works for next year that is about mononormativity that I'm really excited about. Hasn't been announced yet. I would love to see more sort of focused books on, I would love to see one on money.
Yes, I remember we talked about that one.
Yeah. I would love to see some sort of, Canadian context specific books, like about legal stuff. I would love to see one on parenting, of course. Those are sort of the easy gimme topics that, but I also love how so many of these have, just sort of been very, there are a lot of sort of obvious topics that we could do them on, but I love the creativity of some of the topics as well. Like this one, like Carrie Jenkins' Non-Monogamy and Happiness, for example. So there's some that are very practical, and they're like, non-monogamy and death. And then there are some that are just very, very philosophical. And I love that we've got both. And then we've got some that kind of straddle those two areas, like the Alyssa Gonzalez Non-Monogamy and Neurodiversity. Does that.
So good.
Yeah.
I wonder if we could convince Kim Tallbear to do non-monogamy and indigeneity. I mean,
Kim Tallbear can do anything, can write anything she wants for this series. Honestly.
Right? So, yeah. No, and I mean, there's so many. I would love to hear. I would personally, if I could add to that wish list, I would love to see somebody write about non-monogamy and living together, like home living arrangements, and non-monogamy.
There is just Mailer's book, The Polyamorous Home. I haven't read it, so I don't know how, I don't know if it covers everything you'd want to see covered, but there is a book on that. So
yeah, that's good. I should take a look at it. It's just like one of these, non-monogamy and having kids, non-monogamy and long distance, I think.
Yeah.
Non-monogamy and disability would be a great one if anyone wanted to. I don't know. There's just so many interesting potential.
I'd love to see some crossovers with different religions as well. Like I would love a non-monogamy in Judaism and a non-monogamy in Islam and a non-monogamy in Christianity, for example, just to start. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and even, I mean, like, let's just be real. Non-monogamy and kink, like, that seems like another obvious one, right? So, yeah, no, lots of possible amazing snack topics there if folks wanted to.
Yeah, I like that description. Snack topics.
Yeah, they're great. I mean, I've thoroughly enjoyed working with every single one of them, so I'm biased here, but yeah. I'm glad we're doing a live stream, and I'm looking forward to the experience of doing a book tour and launching things. And I'm excited. It's an interesting, fun new phase, fun new thing to do,
Yeah.
you know? Yeah, I know it's old hat for you, but
well, it's been a while. Dates will be announced soon for those who are interested. Eastern Canada and Pacific Northwest. So watch this space.
Watch this. Indeed.
All right. Anything else before we wrap up?
I don't think so. I'm excited that this is out in the world, and thanks for wanting to talk
me too.
about it.
Congratulations again.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
And thanks for trusting us with your work.
Oh my, yeah. Well, who better, really? Honestly, I'm
thank you.
Lucky to be in this little arrangement here. That's good.
Awesome.
I think we're done.
Bye everyone. Thank you for joining us.
Cheers.